All right, everybody, welcome into the Go 24/7 podcast. I am Glenn West. That is Sonny Ship. Sonny, we are 48 hours removed from one of the biggest disappointments, I think, on the field that we've seen, and we are about 12 hours removed from one of the bigger disappointments I think we've seen from a 4-year standpoint, from a head coaching standpoint, from a LSU football era standpoint. Uh, Tigers have moved on from LSU head coach Brian Kelly. He was fired on Sunday. And as early as Monday morning, we are also learning here that LSU made the decision to fire offensive coordinator Joe Sloan. That was also something that was expected here once the Kelly decision was made final, but certainly a lot we have to dig into here, into the weeds here. I think both you and I have been on the phone a lot over the last day or so, talking with different people, talking with different folks about just how quickly this came together. I mean, you and I usually are filming these or recording these post game pods on Sundays after games, and I kind of texted you yesterday morning, maybe let's just hold off here just in case there's some kind of news that comes out on Sunday. I don't think I woke up yesterday thinking that we would be here in this, recording this with LSU now looking for their next head football coach. And just what are your thoughts? I mean, I will just leave it open ended on this, and then we can maybe dive into some of the weeds of what we've been hearing.
Yeah, when I did my snap judgments after the A&M game, it was like trying to come up with a title, and it was like, well, it's pretty easy. Brian Kelly, your time in Baton Rouge is done.
Yeah.
But little did I, I certainly didn't think that it was going to come, this quick. I would be willing to guarantee, and I hate to say guarantee, but I bet you just about everything that Scott Woodward didn't wake up Saturday morning and say, you know what, if we lose this A&M game, we're probably going to go ahead and just get rid of Kelly now. You
Yeah.
know, and so just to just say how quick everything just snowballed, you know, and I think a big reason for that snowball effect is that Scott Woodward knows he's got a new boss about to come in, and his new boss is going to say, okay, so my athletic director is now responsible for the two largest college football buyouts in history,
Yeah.
and also two of the biggest bust coaching hires
Yeah.
when you consider the amount of money that you threw at them. So when this process gets underway, I hope the new president sends Scott Woodward on a long duck hunting trip and lets him go do something else than have a heavy hand, which I don't think he's going to have a heavy hand in this new hire for the reasons that I just alluded to. And he shouldn't,
Yeah.
quite frankly, he shouldn't, and I thought that Woodward's comments that he made in the press release that LSU sent out
Yeah.
made him look like a fool, you know.
They
And the
weren't good.
reason I say that, the reason I say that it made him look like a fool, because it's like, he took this staunch approach that, well, Brian Kelly didn't work out. We thought he was going to work out and stuff like that. But it's like at
No,
some point, and I
the
don't
thing,
expect responsibility to be taken in a press release, but there is a lot of culpability on his hands
sure.
for the situation that we're in.
Yeah, I think the thing that really baffled me about those comments was that he spoke about making this decision on Saturday night after the game. And every reporting that has come out on Sunday, I think has pretty much negated that. Like they did not. I don't think they woke up on Sunday morning thinking that Brian Kelly was not going to be the coach on Monday morning. I think when and we can dive into the weeds on this, and I don't want to kind of jump around on the timeline here, but the Woodward quote, I'm trying to find it here in his statement, but he essentially said, oh, what did he say? He said, ultimately, the success at the level that LSU demands simply did not materialize, and I made the decision to make a change after last night's game. That that is
Just
giving
laughable.
yourself that is giving yourself away right there, because the
Yeah.
very next morning, he walks in, or I guess early morning, late afternoon, or early afternoon, I should say, late morning, early afternoon. He and Brian Kelly reportedly have this conversation or this meeting about the future of the program and what changes are going to be made. And I think, and look, we've heard some varying different things on this. I think what happened was Scott Woodward went to Brian Kelly and said, "Hey, we want you to get rid of Joe Sloan." And on top of that, Brian Kelly said, "Well, if we're going to get rid of Joe Sloan, I also want to get rid of Brad Davis. I want to get rid of some other coaches. I want to make some big changes here." And he was basically told to pump the brakes on that. Like, there was some disconnect on what exactly the kind of changes that were going to be taking place. About what kind of offensive changes would be taking place. There was a disconnect there, and I think that meeting ended, and it was pretty intense from what we understand, pretty heated. And I don't know if there were other people in that meeting or not, but essentially it ended with Kelly, going, leaving the building, and there were staff members that saw him leaving the building, and they were very curious as to why, and they were, and it was, I think the sentiment going into Sunday was there were going to be offensive changes. And I think leaving that meeting is when things really started to take a turn. And it was, no, 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 we're not going to make offensive changes. We're going to make the big dog change. We're going to, this is going to reach the top level here. And I think you started seeing those conversations with the board of supervisors. And, Jeff Landry, the governor, was very involved in these conversations as well. Uh,
I think that's who made the call.
yeah, I think Landry's the one.
I
Yeah,
think the biggest
he
influence. I think. Yep.
had his hands all over this for sure. But just kind of
Absolutely.
following through the timeline here, those conversations really intensified, and they centered around Kelly. Really, I think from that meeting going forward, and there were several meetings that were taking place throughout the course of the day. First, I think to start, it was, okay, what does the future of this program look like under Brian Kelly? And then they ultimately decide they don't want to have a future of this program under Brian Kelly going forward. And then those conversations kind of shift towards the negotiation process. And there's language in Brian Kelly's contract, without getting into the nitty gritty of it, that essentially says if Brian Kelly goes and takes another job, they don't have to pay him the full $53 million buyout. Like, they take away the money that he makes at a new coaching job or a new media job. That money gets negated from his buyout. And so, look, Brian Kelly's not giving back a single penny of that $53 million. That much you don't even need to report on.
He would
But
be. He would be a fool too.
they are not going to negotiate from that perspective. I think it was just getting a handle of, okay, is Brian Kelly going to be serious contender for another job somewhere else? And what does that buyout process, that payment process look like? And that's something they're still hashing out. And I think that was also part of Scott Woodward's comments. But when they make that
And
decision,
also,
yeah,
go
go
ahead.
for it. No, when they
No,
make
I
that,
was just.
yeah.
Oh, you go.
Okay, when they make that decision to officially relieve Brian Kelly of his duties as head coach, I believe it happened in the mid to late afternoon. Like, I think they made that decision, they made that call, and they informed him of that decision. And in that final meeting, I think Jeff Landry was there. I think the board of supervisors was there, but I don't think Scott Woodward was in that final meeting. I think that has been pretty well documented and well covered, which is very interesting as we move forward in this process as to how LSU is going to handle this going forward. So, is there anything you want to jump in here with any of that timeline? Is it off? Is it? I believe I covered it all, but I think
No, yeah, I think you did a very good job on that. I do think I do think that one of the most significant developments of the day, and I kind of mentioned this when I did my snap judgments after the A&M game. Actually, I was pretty much done with that. About three 3 minutes left in the game,
yeah,
but I mentioned in there how now LSU has to either figure out what they're going to do, or someone, a big donor slash S, is going to have to make make a promise, make a dedication, say, hey, don't worry about it, we got it.
yeah,
And I don't think that this escalates as quickly as it did on Sunday, if those people didn't step up and say, we'll handle it.
Yeah.
And, there's, we know it's pretty well documented of who the big, of who the big donors are at LSU. You look at NIL, you look at the people who are, you look at the people who have the money and who are heavily involved in the program. And
Yeah.
I think that influence made it so much easier for the board.
Yeah.
Is they got a big time money commitment.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was one. I don't know if it was several. I've heard a couple of names. I don't want to mention those names just out of respect for their privacy
Yeah.
at this point. But without that commitment, we're probably still sitting here right now trying to figure out, okay, what LSU's trying to figure out what are they going to do with
Yeah.
this, because
Yeah, because
you know
that's the interesting part of this is because, even in the early parts of the afternoon yesterday, it didn't really feel like this was going to be a final decision that came down on Sunday. It felt like it was going to drag on for a few days as they kind of figured out what the next best step was for making this call on Kelly. And so the fact that it got so final so quickly, that's the thing that just keeps coming back in my head. Is like, man, like they must have really, really had some big money people step up and say, we're fed up with this. We want this guy out. We want to move on. We want to go get the next big headhunter guy for the next several years of our program. We're ready to make this change now, and that was very interesting. And so I was we were writing our pieces and things in the middle of the afternoon, or I guess late afternoon now. I sending texts and conversations back and forth with Sonny about just what to include in all this info, and then we get the news that LSU's called a team meeting at 8 o'clock, and that comes through at about 6:30, 7 o'clock when they announce that the team meeting has kind of taken place, and then a few minutes later after that is when the official news breaks that Brian Kelly has been fired by LSU. I will say I drove over to the team meeting and was standing outside the football facility with a couple of other reporters as players arrived and players left, and saw Brian Kelly, leave in his car after his about. I want to say he went in there for about 5 minutes. The meeting was supposed to start at 8 o'clock. I think it started maybe a little bit after 8. Brian Kelly goes in and meets with the team, says a few words to them, and then leaves right back. Leaves I think in less than about 5 minutes, as it was described to me. And so the totality of the meeting that took place last night was about 12 minutes, from what I understand. We saw players kind of shuffling out at in various little packs of groups, and it just had it has a very weird, bizarre feeling because I feel like no matter what you think about Brian Kelly, the it's not just Brian Kelly at the end of the day that's going to be affected. It's going to be a lot of these coaches, a lot of these coaches' families, a lot of these players' families. And, to be quite honest with you, a lot of these players get close with the position coaches, with the coordinators. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we've walked into an LSU player interviews meeting and these players have just absolutely gushed about Blake Baker and the job that he's done, and the position coaches like Corey Raymond and all these relationships and things that get built throughout the course of an off season. And so you could tell there was definitely kind of a somber feeling, like a weird kind of vibe coming out when the players were leaving, when the coaches were leaving. And it was, yeah, it's one of those things that, kind of just reminds you that at the end of the day, these are all just people, and their futures are very much in doubt right now. And another guy that we can talk a little bit more about here is Joe Sloan, offensive coordinator. He was also relieved of his duties late last night, from what we understand. That announcement was made early this morning by LSU. By the time that you're reading or listening or watching this, that decision came down on Monday morning. And so you're out your head coach, you're out your offensive coordinator. Frank Wilson will be taking over as the interim head coach. Alex Atkins will be the interim offensive coordinator. He has some play calling experience from his days at Florida State. I think he and I think it's also been reported that Tim Rattay will have a hand in play calling. I don't think he'll be the primary play caller, but Alex Atkins and him will be working together with the offense here going forward. So a lot to digest, man. I mean, it's just a lot to kind of get your head around and get your mind around. Is there anything, I guess, kind of leaving Sunday and into Monday here that now as we look, into the immediate future and the long-term future of this program that you want answers to sooner than later? Is there anything that kind of sticks out? Because I have a few things in mind.
Yeah, I think I think I think I guess the progression from here, um, you know, first thing you got to do, you got to get a new president.
Yes,
You
that
got
was
to
going
get
to
a
be what I was.
university
Yeah.
president. And there's a chance that we could hear something on that by by the end of the week,
Yeah.
possibly over the weekend.
Yeah.
So that's the first move right there. I think one of that person's first moves is going to be, um, you have to you have to evaluate the athletic department, not just the football program,
Oh yeah,
and then you also
you have to decide whether or not Scott Woodward is the guy that's going to be leading this
that's it.
charge.
That's
That's
it.
what it's
That's
going to be.
it. That's it. I think that right there is step two. Now, while you're going through these steps, you're putting out feelers.
Yeah.
You're putting out feelers with agents. You're checking to see, okay, how entrenched is Clark Lee at Vanderbilt?
Mhm.
Does he really want to stay at Vanderbilt? What about Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss? What about, the you got to check with Nick Saban. I mean, you just absolutely have to. The comments that he's made in the past about how he regretted leaving LSU, how much he loved Baton Rouge, and how that was the job that, he always regretted that he left. So you have to. I mean, that's the first call that you
If he
absolutely
hangs
made.
up the phone after two
He
words,
hangs up the
you can at
phone
least
after
tell
2 words.
yourself you made the case. Yeah, you made the case.
Exactly, exactly. And so then from that point, I think you start you start putting out those feelers to the guys that we put on our first hot board. And like I put in the hot board, look, these are some coordinators who we feel will be head coaches sooner rather than later.
Yeah,
So if LSU decides to go the younger route and try to build instead of having to make another $10 million investment on a head coach, well, then that could be a route that you see them go. And we've seen that work. We've seen that work with several people, at several places. And so there's some guys on that list, but then you just then you go down and then you look at your head coaches. You look at the head coaches, you look at the ones who have the resume, who have the experience, who are getting it done at other places. So you can do that while you're still going through that step of figuring out step one and step two. And then once you get, once the university president, once they make their decision um, on the president, on the AD, once they get that done, then you really start getting, I think, into the nuts and bolts of the actual search, of who's going to
yeah,
be involved, how that's going to go down. But you don't have a lot of time because Penn State, Florida, Stanford, Oklahoma State, and I know some of these schools don't really, pale in comparison to the LSU job, but you've already got others who have a head start,
yeah. A couple
and
weeks here at
so
least. Yeah,
right, and so you need to get that ball rolling because the early signing period is December 3rd through 5th this
yeah,
year.
yeah.
So
Look,
you've got the early signing period. You've got coaches who are going to be coaching who are going to be coaching into December, at least maybe January.
yeah,
Lane Kiffin is probably at the top of everyone's wish list. If you polled the LSU fan base and said, "Who do you want?" The only person who I could think of who would get more votes would be Nick Saban.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
I
and
think it's
so
very good.
when you start looking at the list of guys, Lane Kiffin, Mike Elko, uh, Clark Lee, those guys could very well be playing into the college football playoff.
Yeah,
And so, even John Sumrall at
yeah,
Tulane,
yeah. He could be.
I
Yeah,
mean, buddy,
it's very interesting.
I keep seeing Tulane place in that college football playoff.
He's a
You
very
know,
interesting candidate, in my opinion. I think
yeah,
Sumrall. very interesting. Yeah,
Yeah. And so, and so you have these steps that you have to go through the natural progression, but
yeah,
you also have to be, you got to be chewing gum and walking at the same time.
for sure. Yeah,
And
yeah, and those
and so that's going to be the interesting part to see how it all plays out, because there's certain things that have to happen before you can move on in
yeah.
this process.
And look,
And
if
I think the cloud over Scott Woodward is probably a big part of that. And
that's
did you see? And when Jeff Landry, you remember after the LSU game, Jeff Landry, was it that he tweeted, or did he
he
post it on
tweeted something
Facebook or
out
Instagram
about LSU
about the
raising
ticket?
the ticket
LSU putting a
prices.
pick of worse. Yeah, LSU might want to reevaluate that decision on the
It,
ticket prices and stuff.
you know,
And I think, you know, why would you, if you have a head coach who is not really in turmoil, but that has some chatter in the fan base. You have picked a worse time
yeah,
to announce the ticket prices. But I think also that put pressure on Jeff Landry and the board of supervisors. Because how are you going to raise ticket prices? How are you going to raise parking prices if you've got a head coach who replaces his offensive staff? In that sense, you're looking at a situation to where you have to make a 2-year commitment to him,
yeah,
because no
exactly.
offensive coordinator in the right mind is going to come in thinking that they have a 1-year plan, you know. And
Very
so,
interesting. I think the thing for me that really has raised my antennas on Scott Woodward here is the fact that he was not in one of those
yeah,
meetings at the very end there
absolutely,
yesterday when that decision was
absolutely.
made. I think, look, Louisiana politics and LSU football, they go together. They've always gone together here. Jeff Landry,
Huey started
He's
it.
already he's already look, the thing I think the thing that's interesting here is that he's already replaced a good number of the board of supervisors at LSU, like I think 4 or 5, and there's more on the way. Like he's going to have a heavy influence on the board of supervisors here going forward, for LSU as they go through their process of hiring the next president, and then that I think the thing that really will be interesting to me is when they hire that next president, whoever that is, and whenever that decision is made, what that president decides on the future of Scott Woodward, I think will either accelerate the timeline of when we can expect the head coach to be made, that process to really start going, in a more speedy, hasty direction, or it could maybe linger it a little bit or hinder it, because if they decide if this new president decides I don't want Scott Woodward to be the one making this call and they have to go find a new athletic director, well, that's a whole nother process that you have to go through. And that has to go pretty hastily too. So you get the next AD in here, and then that next AD is going to have to really quickly evaluate what it is that he wants in his next head coach, and it's one of those things that they have time, but they have to make really good use of their time here going forward.
See, I don't think they necessarily have to have an athletic director in place, because I think that Jeff Landry, the board of supervisors, and the new president, I think that they are going to be the ones who make the call,
Yeah,
and that they are going to tell Scott Woodward who they're hiring.
yeah,
I'm not saying he's not going to be involved in the process, because
mhm,
he's been through these things before,
yeah.
but it's not going to be a blank check like he had with Brian Kelly, and
Well, there is
it's not going to.
there's one report from Ross Dellinger over at Yahoo Sports, who's basically has said or written about that, essentially. Landry is the one that's already starting to meet with these big donors and these big money guys to not only get the money to buy out Kelly and his staff, but to also raise money for the next coach and the next staff, and then whatever it is that they decide to go on that route. So there's another reason right there as to why uh, you know Woodward could be a part of this process, but he's definitely not going to have the carte blanche reins like he did in making the Kelly decision. Like that I think those days are over.
Yeah, and nor should he. Nor
Yeah,
should he. Like I said, because you can. I mean, you know, Woodward made the decision that he made at Texas A&M with Jimbo Fisher.
Hmm.
That didn't come back to bite him until he had made the decision with Brian Kelly.
Yeah.
You know, and so now all of a
Fool me
sudden,
one
you
time,
know,
shame on you. Fool me twice,
right,
can't
yeah,
put the blame
yeah.
on you.
He wasn't criticized. Yeah, he wasn't heavily criticized when he did the same thing with Brian Kelly because Jimbo Fisher was still good.
Yeah.
Jimbo Fisher gets fired and it's like, whoa, is this the same guy who set up the Jimbo Fisher contract and did the same thing with Brian Kelly at LSU? You know, so now you've got big strikes,
Yeah.
two big strikes, and you could and you know you could even make an argument that you might even be able to make an argument that he doesn't get a third strike because he bunted on two strikes.
Yeah.
And so it's gonna for me it's gonna be really interesting to see how much influence he really has because I think that he should be sitting there right now wondering, what's going to happen to me.
Yeah. No, it's a very good point. Look, I think there's another angle to this, a more short term angle to this from the current roster standpoint. Look, we know what's coming, right? I mean, there's going to be guys leaving for the draft. There's going to be guys leaving for the
A lot of
transfer
attrition.
portal. There's going to be a lot of turnover with this roster, no matter what happens here over the next month on the field. I think for me, what I want to see, and look, Frank Wilson loves this place. I think he is the right guy for this job at this time for leading LSU through these next several weeks. I think he's a guy that can kind of galvanize this roster to some degree, and explain to them or get it into their heads that, hey, we still have something to play for here. You still have future tape that you have to put out there. You still have future things that you can accomplish here over the next month, and let's just not pack it in, essentially. And
Right.
I think Frank is the right guy for that. I
And I think
think
that's going to be tough too
it,
because
it could be very tough, yeah, because
the
a lot of
Texas
these guys,
A&M
yeah,
the Texas A&M game, they definitely packed it in
yeah.
the second
I
half.
mean,
In
when
the
that,
second half, and I go back to that Marcel Reed's second touchdown. I think it was Marcel Reed. His second touchdown run. Harold Perkins pulled up. You could
yeah,
see it on TV. I know you were at the game, but on TV, you
yeah,
could see him pull up and just not even take the angle to
yeah,
go at him.
yeah,
And and when I saw that, and I tell you what, man, probably one of the other things that absolutely just drove me crazy was, and this is not picking on the kid,
yeah,
but when Aaron Burrell kicked off, guy feels it at the 1 yard line, and he makes the tackle at midfield, and you would have thought that it won the game with the celebration and stuff like that, And it was like, is that really where we are now?
yeah.
Is that where we are? Like, is the focus that we have going into this game right here? And
This
when
is
I saw that, and the game wasn't out of reach at that point, you still had a little bit of hope that maybe a turnover here, maybe something happens here. But
yeah.
when I saw that right there, it was like, okay, man. I mean, this is like
This next hire, whoever it is they
elementary.
make, has to re-energize this program from a physicality, from a mindset standpoint, from a we're LSU and we're gonna be bigger, faster, stronger, tougher than you. Like that was for all of the faults of the previous coaches with Les Miles and Ed Orgeron and some of the things that happened with them on the field. They had teams and they had players that had strong mindsets and they had strong, uh, they had a strong sense of what they knew they needed to do to have success out there on the field, and that was to be the bigger and better athlete than the other guy. And that has been lost a little bit, I think, the last few years. And it's something that they're going to have to really look at when I think they're evaluating their next coach and their next coaching hire. Um, I do think from a short term perspective, though, I do want to see some of these younger guys continue to get reps. I think there are some pieces on this roster that if, LSU gets in their ear and is like, hey, we know we're going through this shift right now, but we believe you're a future pillar to this program. We believe in your talent. We believe in what you're about on the field, and we want to see you stay. Like I think there are some players that will have that open ear, and look, turmoil and coaching turmoil can have one effect on a player, but so can NIL, and so can opportunity, and so can, the chance to thrive at a school like LSU, in a program like LSU. And so I'm looking hard at Harlan Berry. I'm looking hard at Trades Green. Looking hard at DJ Pickett, Carius Kern, Solomon Thomas. Some of these younger players that are in the program right now that you feel like could be a future piece to your program. I would lean into those guys heavily. Like, I know this is a group that has a lot of veteran presence and a lot of veteran experience. And I'm not saying that you make those changes and you take guys like Monsieur Delane or Braylon Moore or Josh Thompson out of the lineup. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying from a opportunity standpoint, from a expectation standpoint, I would want a lot of these younger pieces in the fold here over the next month or so.
Yeah, and I tell you what, one of the guys who's probably gonna, man, and this is, I mean, this is a guy we're familiar with his name and stuff, but a lot of people are not. Sherman Wilson is the director of player retention at
Yeah,
LSU. Brian Kelly, created the position, appointed Wilson to man that position, and basically that is his job of keeping players from entering the portal when they're considering leaving for the draft or whatever. He is that liaison. He is going to play a big role, and he's got he's one of those guys who has a great relationship with the players. Just puts the blood, sweat, and tears into everything he does. But he is going to have a big role here going forward,
yes.
as far as how mass will the exodus be,
Yeah.
you know. And so that's certainly going to be one of the aspects, because like I was telling my son, I was like, yeah, boy, he was asking me, about coaches and this and that and stuff. And he was like, oh man, these going to be fun seeing all this. I said, oh yeah, it's going to be fun covering it too. Kind of rolled my eyes. I was like,
Oh my
nah,
gosh.
I said, it's going to be busy. I said, it's going to be busy, but I said, these next 3 months, I might not be making all your soccer games.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I was deliberating last night whether or not I had time to take a shower, like between all the
I
stuff
know,
going
I
on,
know.
and like whether I could go pick up dinner and stuff of that nature. We're going to be in for a long road ahead, folks. There's a lot of steps that are going to have to take place for LSU to have their next head coach. But I think what the last few weeks have shown us is that the fan base is ready for this. Like, the fan base
Mhm.
was more than ready to kind of dawn a new day, so to speak, with this football program, and they got their wish. They're going to get their wish here, and it's going to be a long process. It's going to be one that I think LSU can't rush in any way, but also at the same time they're going to have to make some of these decisions here sooner than later at the same time, and so they're going to have all their ducks in a row, and a lot of these people have to be in alignment as we move forward here over the next several weeks and months. So we'll have much more throughout the week. We'll have much more through the open date, and certainly as we draw closer to Alabama here in a few weeks. But thank you guys for sticking tuned with us. This was a big night, obviously last night, a big day for our for the future of LSU, and we'll have all the coverage and all the analysis on what it means going forward, and we'll keep you in tune with everything that we're hearing along the way. So with that, he's Sonny Ship, I'm Glenn West, and thank you for watching and listening to the Go 24/7 podcast.